Me and my best friend were women whose lives were measured in stolen moments and survival instincts. My only goal was to find a shred of beauty in my charcoal sketches, while Zara's was to finally outrun a past that shadowed her every move. But on a wild, vodka-soaked night in Moscow, we didn't just find a party. We found matching platinum bands that bound us to the city's coldest predators. The owners were Alexei Volkov, a man whose reputation was carved from the very ice of a Russian winter, and Dmitry Morozov, a man whose playful glint hid a predatory focus. What we didn't know, as we woke up with pounding headaches, was that we hadn't just made a drunken mistake. We had stumbled into a deadly intersection of fate and old blood feuds. Attempting to escape was the logical thing to do, but it was also the first irreversible step into a world ruled by Bratva law, where the only thing more dangerous than the assassins at the door was the realization that we might not want to leave. My name is Natasha Chen. I was a delicate spark in a world of gray. At 25, I balanced the fragile hopes of a struggling artist with the weight of a life that felt like a constant retreat. I was gentle and observant, my large hazel eyes holding a soft gaze that seemed to catch the light even in the dimmest Moscow clubs. I was driven by an uncompromising vision, a world where my art could finally heal the fractures in my soul, but that dream was a distant North Star on an exhausting march through a life of not quite enough. Beside me stood Zara Mitchell, a striking anchor in the chaotic sea of our friendship. Zara was the contrast to my softness, sharp, angular, and forged in the fire of the American streets she'd survived. With steel-gray eyes and a fearless stare, she was the practical one, the one who knew the value of an exit strategy and a well-placed lie. While I looked for beauty, Zara looked for threats. Together, we were a duality of hope and grit. We were two women seeking a freedom we couldn't quite define. We thought this trip was a temporary escape from our dead-end lives in America. We didn't realize that the path to our true selves wouldn't be found in a museum or a sketchbook, but through the fire and shadows of the men who now claimed them as their own. They say a sketch begins with a single line, a stroke of charcoal that defines the boundary between light and shadow. My life used to be composed of those lines, predictable, safe, and utterly gray. But some lines, once drawn, can never be erased. They become scars. Or, in our case, they become cold, platinum circles around our ring fingers. The memories of last night are a jagged montage of neon and static. A blurred chapel with velvet curtains. The sharp burn of premium vodka. The rhythmic buzz of a tattoo needle against skin. A flashes of laughter, the heavy weight of a hand on a waist, and the sudden, metallic scent of blood. Then, two pink lines on a plastic stick that changed everything before we even knew who we were. I woke up to a silence, so heavy it felt like a physical weight on my chest. The room was bathed in the soft, cinematic light of a Moscow morning, but the warmth didn't reach me. I sat up, my chestnut hair a tangled mess over my silk blouse, my hazel eyes searching the opulence of a suite I didn't recognize. "Good morning, wife." The voice was like shifting glaciers. I turned to find a man standing by the window, his silhouette imposing and broad-shouldered against the pale sun. Alexei Volkov. He was a vision of lethal precision in a black suit, his ice-blue eyes devoid of emotion as he looked at me. My phone, sitting on the nightstand, buzzed with a notification. Before I could reach for it, he raised a silenced pistol and fired. The device exploded into a spray of plastic and glass. "Your old life is disconnected," he said, his jawline square and masculine. "Don't try to find it again." Across the hall, behind a heavy oak door, Zara was having a very different awakening. She didn't wake up confused. She woke up ready to kill. Her steel-gray eyes snapped open, her athletic frame tensed as she realized she wasn't alone. Dmitry Morozov was leaning against the dresser, a mischievous glint in his deep green eyes as he tossed a folder onto the bed. It was a mugshot. Zara's mugshot from 3 years ago. "Quite the resume, Lapachka," Dmitry smirked, his tousled black hair falling over his forehead. He looked dangerous, predatory, yet strangely playful. "I usually prefer my women without a criminal record, but for a wife as striking as you, I'll make an exception. Zara didn't waste time on pleasantries. She grabbed a secondary burner phone hidden in her combat boot and fired off a single text to the only person she trusted. Code 911.
Lobby. Now.
I received it on my backup device just as Alexei led me out of the suite, his hand a firm, inescapable weight on the small of my back. We converged in the grand lobby, a study in contrasts. I was a vision of soft pastels and feminine fear. Zara was a pillar of black leather and sharp defiance. We locked eyes, a silent conversation passing between us that a decade of friendship had perfected. What the hell did we do? The answer came not in words but in lead. The front windows of the hotel shattered in a deafening spray of crystal. Civilians screamed, diving for cover as the rhythmic thud of automatic fire tore through the gilded lobby. In a heartbeat, the husbands shifted from captors to predators. Alexei's massive frame was suddenly a shield, his broad shoulders blocking me from the glass shards as he pulled a weapon from his holster with terrifying calm. Down. Dmitri roared, tackling Zara to the polished marble floor as a line of bullets stitched a pattern across the wall where her head had been a second before. It was a whirlwind of violence. Alexei moved with cold, mechanical precision, returning fire while navigating me toward the rear exit. Dmitri followed, his movements more fluid and chaotic, a grin almost visible through the smoke as he laid down cover fire. They shoved us into the back of a blacked-out armored SUV, the tires screaming against the pavement as we tore away from the curb. The interior of the car smelled of expensive leather and gunpowder. Who were those people? Zara demanded, her voice a jagged blade. And what makes you think we're going anywhere with you? Alexei turned from the front seat, his icy gaze pinning us both to the upholstery. Those were the men who want you dead because of the names you signed on those certificates last night. In Russia, there is no annulment for the Bratva. You are the property of the Volkov and Morozov families now. You are our wives, to the world and to our enemies. I looked at the platinum band on my finger, then at Zara. Her face was a mask of calculation, but I could see the tremor in her hands. The 1 month to escape plan we had whispered about in the elevator already felt like a fairy tale. Zara, I whispered, the reality of the blood on the lobby floor finally sinking in. What the hell did we do last night? Zara looked out at the blurring streets of Moscow, her jaw set.
We survived.
Now we have to figure out how to do it again tomorrow. The black-armored SUV moved like a shadow through the outskirts of Moscow, eventually turning into a private drive flanked by iron gates and armed sentries. The Volkov compound rose from the mist like a modern fortress, a sprawling mansion of glass and cold stone that seemed designed to intimidate. As we were ushered out, my hazel eyes swept over the imposing architecture, feeling the weight of the walls closing in. Beside me, Zara was already a different person. Her steel-gray gaze was darting from camera lenses to perimeter heights, her mind instinctively mapping every exit and blind spot. Inside, the coldness of the exterior vanished, replaced by the scent of beeswax and old tea. A small, regal woman with silver hair stood in the grand foyer, her presence commanding enough to make even Alexei and Dmitri pause. This was the Volkov matriarch. She looked at me first, her eyes wise and unsettlingly perceptive. She has kind eyes, Alexei, she said in a voice like gravel and silk, reaching out to brush a stray chestnut wave from my face. Do not break her. This family has enough broken things. Then, she turned to Zara, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. And this one is fierce. Try to keep up, Dmitri. She will not be tamed by a crooked smile. She looked at her grandson, Alexei, with a lingering sadness. I saw the flicker of hope in her expression, a silent wish that the ice-blue stare of the man beside me might one day hold a spark of the joy he hadn't known in years. Once she retreated, the air turned professional and freezing. We were led into a study lined with leather-bound books and heavy silence. The rules are simple, Alexei stated, his voice a low vibration. You witnessed a high-level Bratva ceremony. Under our code, the marriage makes you protected. Without it, You are targets for every rival family looking to weaken the Volkov line. You are trapped, but you are safe. 1 month, Dmitri added, his mischievous glint replaced by a hard, calculating seriousness. We eliminate the threat that followed you to the hotel. We secure the borders. Then, the annulments are signed and you are free to return to your sketches and your secrets. They left us in a sprawling, luxurious bedroom suite that felt more like a gilded cage. The moment the door clicked shut, Zara and I collapsed into a fierce embrace. We didn't speak for a long time, we just held on to the only familiar thing in a world that had gone mad. Natasha, listen to me, Zara whispered, her sharp features hardening as she pulled back. Her eyes were steel, her voice a low hiss. We aren't waiting for a month. We're going to rob them blind, find a way past those gates, and run. I know how men like this work. They don't let things go once they've claimed them. My hands were trembling, but I looked into her gray eyes and felt my own resolve solidify. Together, I promised. Like always. As the evening shadows stretched across the room, I wandered into an adjoining chamber and stopped short. It was a fully stocked art studio. Expensive oils, canvases of every size, and professional lighting that mimicked the softest morning glow. Alexei had remembered. Through the haze of the vodka and the chaos of the night before, he had listened when I spoke of my art. Tears pricked my eyes. No one had ever done something just for me, without expecting a debt in return. Down the hall, Zara slipped into Dmitri's private office, her footsteps silent. She found what she was looking for in a sleek black folder. It wasn't just a mugshot, it was a comprehensive file. Every con she'd ever pulled, every alias she'd worn like a second skin, every warrant she thought she'd buried. Her stare hardened into flint. Dmitri hadn't just stumbled upon her. He had been tracking her. He knew exactly who she was before they ever stepped into that chapel. In the security hub of the mansion, the two brothers watched the monitors in silence. Alexei sat perfectly still, his ice-blue eyes softening as he watched me touch the brushes in the studio. She looks exactly like her, he murmured, his voice thick with a ghost of a memory. The same eyes. The same grace. Dmitri didn't look at me. His green eyes were fixed on Zara as she closed his file, his expression one of grim realization. She's the one, Alexei, he said quietly. The one who destroyed my father. The one I should hate. By midnight, the compound had fallen into a restless quiet. Zara and I slept in the massive bed, curled toward each other for warmth and safety. Outside the heavy oak door, the two men stood like sentries. Alexei stood with his back to the wall, a silent protector over the woman who reminded him of a lost light. Dmitri stood with his arms crossed, a predator guarding the woman who held the keys to his darkest history. Neither could articulate why they were truly there, guarding the very women who were planning their escape. The long, mahogany dining table felt like a battlefield, flanked by dozens of silent, dangerous men whose presence made the air thick with the scent of espresso and gun oil. I sat there in a soft, lilac morning dress, feeling ethereal and utterly lost among the sea of dark suits. Beside me, Zara was a stark contrast in casual black, her athletic frame poised as if she were waiting for the signal to vault over the table. The silence was broken when Zara, trying to assert some level of control, attempted a phrase in Russian she'd overheard the night before. The table went deathly quiet. A scarred elder at the far end bristled, his hand twitching toward his waistband. Dmitri didn't miss a beat. He leaned back, a mischievous glint in his green eyes as he smoothly translated her accidental insult into a witty compliment about the man's lineage. The tension broke into gruff laughter, and Dmitri shot Zara a wink that she answered, with a steel-gray glare. I tried to focus on my tea, but the conversation shifted. A lieutenant mentioned the successful dismantling of a trafficking ring near the border. Suddenly, the room began to tilt. The clatter of silverware sounded like chains. The low rumble of male voices became a roar in my ears. My breath hitched, my porcelain skin turning a ghostly, translucent pale. I didn't know why my heart was clawing at my ribs, only that the walls were suddenly too close. Alexei's ice-blue eyes snapped to mine. He didn't ask questions. With a cold, commanding grace, he rose and gripped my elbow, excusing us from the table before the others could witness my unraveling. He led me back to the art studio, the silence of the room acting like a bomb. "Paint," he commanded, his voice a low, steady anchor. "The colors don't lie. They'll help you breathe." I gripped the edge of a canvas, my hazel eyes wide and vulnerable. "Why do you care what happens to me, Alexei? I'm just a mistake from a vodka bottle." For a second, the ice in his gaze cracked. "I don't," he lied, his square jaw tightening. "But my grandmother likes you. She has instincts I've learned not to question." We stood there, inches apart, both knowing the lie was as thin as the veil of a bride. While I sought refuge in charcoal, Zara was hunting. She moved through the compound's corridors like a shadow, her con artist's mind cataloging security rotations. She found the server room, her fingers flying across a keyboard with practiced precision. She was seconds away from an encrypted file when a shadow fell across the monitors. Dmitri was leaning against the doorframe, his lean frame blocking her only exit. Zara braced for a blow, or worse, a cage. Instead, he simply watched her, his expression hovering between a smirk and genuine admiration. "Impressed," he mused. "But if you truly want to know who I am, Zara, you don't need a password." He walked over and placed a yellowed, handwritten note on the desk. It was his father's suicide note, a raw, bleeding confession of debt and shame. Zara's steel-gray stare softened as she read the jagged lines. For the first time, she didn't see a captor. She saw a man built from the same wreckage she was. Later that afternoon, we met in the high-walled garden. We spoke in hushed tones, mapping out our escape. Zara had identified the accounts. I had noted the shifts of the guards. "1 month," Zara whispered, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "Then we disappear." "Together," I whispered back, yet my eyes drifted toward the mansion. The days that followed were a blur of forced proximity. In the private range, Alexei stood behind me, his broad shoulders a wall of heat as his large hands guided mine on the grip of a pistol. "Steady," he breathed against my ear, and for a moment, the weapon felt less heavy than the look in his eyes. In the gym, Zara and Dmitri moved in a violent, beautiful dance of sparring, her athletic curves clashing against his lean athleticism. There were stolen glances across the dinner table and touches that lingered a second too long when passing a glass of wine. That night, a haunting melody drifted through the vents, pulling me from my bed. I followed the sound to a darkened parlor where Alexei sat at a grand piano. His silhouette was lonely, his fingers moving over the keys to produce a sad, traditional Russian melody that seemed to weep. I stood in the doorway, tears streaming down my face. I didn't understand the music, yet my soul recognized it. It felt like a ghost reaching out from a fog, a memory of a young boy playing for a little girl in a place filled with shadows. I didn't know his name then, and I barely knew it now, but as the music broke my heart, I realized the con we were playing was no longer against the bratva. We were conning ourselves into believing we could still leave. The silk of my flowing gown felt like a shroud as I sat at the long, polished table. My chestnut hair was pinned back in elegant waves, and across from me, Zara looked like a lethal shadow in sleek black. We were playing our parts, two porcelain dolls in a room full of monsters, until the heavy doors groaned open. Irina Sokolov didn't enter. She invaded. She was stunning in a way that felt like a sharpened blade, her ambitious gaze sweeping over the Bratva elite before locking onto me with possessive ice. "The great Alexei Volkov, married to a ghost," she sneered, her voice cutting through the political murmurs. She leaned over me, her face inches from mine. "You're nothing but a replacement for the girl he couldn't save." As she moved, a cloyingly sweet, metallic perfume hit me. It was a sensory trigger, a key turning in a rusted lock. Suddenly, I wasn't in a ballroom. I was in a cold, dark room with stone walls and that same suffocating scent. My lungs seized. My hazel eyes went unfocused as the world blurred into gray. I didn't think. I ran, stumbling out into the midnight air of the garden, gasping for a breath that wouldn't come. "Breathe with me, Natasha. Count." Alexei was there. He didn't touch me. He respected the invisible barrier of my panic, but his imposing frame knelt before me, a wall of heat against the night. His ice-blue eyes, usually so cold, were burning with a rare, raw emotion.
"4 in.
"Hold."
4 out," he commanded.
His deep voice was a tether, grounding my fractured mind. When the world finally stopped spinning, I looked at him, my voice a mere thread. "Why is she so angry?" Alexei's stare softened, his thumb hovering just inches from my cheek. "Because she isn't you. She'll never be you." He leaned in, the gravity of the moment pulling us together until I could feel the heat of his breath. We hovered on the edge of a kiss, a desperate, terrifying want, before he pulled back at the last second, the weight of his crown returning to his brow. While I was drowning in ghosts, I knew Zara was facing her own. Dmitri had taken her back to his loft, where the playful glint in his green eyes had died. He showed her the evidence, the trail of the Khan that had killed his father. I was trying to save him. Zara's voice broke, her sharp features crumbling as she confessed the truth about her ex, Victor. He controlled me. He said it was the only way. Victor Volkov? Dmitri's voice was a low growl. The realization that his own uncle had weaponized Zara against his family shifted his rage. You were his victim, too. For the first time, he held her, his cold rings pressing against her skin as she finally broke. But as we began to find sanctuary in them, the shadows were watching. A package was waiting for me back at the compound. Old, grainy photos of the orphanage. From the darkness beyond the gates, Victor Volkov watched us through glass, a phone pressed to his ear. "They're getting comfortable," he whispered. "Time to remind them why they should be afraid." The morning light was an intruder, cutting through the studio windows as I painted with a frantic, obsessive energy. My chestnut hair was tangled, my hazel eyes bloodshot from a night spent chasing ghosts on canvas. Down the hall, I knew Zara was doing her own version of hunting, her fingers flying over a laptop as she built a digital fortress against the memory of Victor. We were both vibrating with the aftershocks of the dinner, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped in the form of a plain manila envelope. No return address. No note. Inside were 2 photographs, aged and curling at the edges. One was of a little girl, perhaps 7, with my delicate features and the same haunted expression. Beside her stood a boy of 9, his skin pale and his expression far too serious for a child. They were standing in front of the gray stone walls of the orphanage I had seen in my flashes. I didn't recognize the girl, but my heart stuttered when I looked at the boy. "I know him," I whispered, my voice trembling. "How do I know those eyes? Where did you get these?" The voice was a thunderclap. Alexei stood in the doorway, his ice-blue eyes wider than I had ever seen them. He crossed the room in 3 strides, snatching the photos from my hand. As he looked at them, the blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghostly pallor. A terrifying rage ignited in his gaze. He slammed his fist into the glass-topped drafting table, the surface shattering into 1,000 diamonds. He didn't seem to feel the blood dripping from his cut hand. He turned to me, his imposing frame radiating a cold, suffocating authority. "You do not leave the suite. Not for the garden, not for the gym. Do you understand? Alexei, what are those photos? Who is? Stay inside, Natasha," he roared, before slamming the door. I heard the heavy thud of the electronic lock engaging. He was locking me in for my safety, but to an artist whose mind was already a prison, it felt like a death sentence. I spent hours pacing the room, my delicate hands shaking. I studied the digital copies of the photos I'd managed to snap before he took them. Every time I closed my eyes, a fragment surfaced, a boy's voice calling, "Tasha," a hand reaching through iron bars, and the crushing weight of darkness closing in. A soft click-scratch at the door interrupted my spiral. Seconds later, the lock disengaged, and Zara slipped inside. She looked tactical in her black gear, her steel-gray eyes sharp and focused. "We're getting out. Tonight," she said, pulling me to my feet. I found the service tunnels. Dmitri thinks he's the only one who knows the layout of this fortress, but he underestimated my boredom. We moved like shadows through the bowels of the compound, navigating damp, narrow passages that smelled of earth and ancient stone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a bird wanting to fly. We reached the final heavy door that led to the forest perimeter. Zara reached for the handle, but it swung open before she could touch it. Dmitri stood there, his lean athletic frame casually blocking the exit. His green eyes were amused, a crooked smile playing on his lips. You really think we don't have the tunnels monitored, Lapachka? I'm impressed you made it this far, truly. Move, Dmitri. Zara spat, her jaw set. Alexei will be furious, he said, ignoring her. But I have to admit, I've never seen a woman break his security before. Hours later, the front doors of the mansion hit the walls with a violent bang. Alexei returned, his black suit splattered with blood that wasn't his. He radiated a controlled, terrifying violence, a man who had left a trail of bodies to find the person who had sent those photos. He stormed into my room, his presence filling every inch of the space. You tried to run, he growled, his ice-blue eyes flashing. I'm not your prisoner or your doll. I screamed, the fear finally turning into a white-hot spark of defiance. I stepped forward and swung, my delicate hand cracking against his scarred face. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. You want me safe? Then treat me like a person with agency. Tell me the truth, or let me go. Alexei froze. He didn't strike back. He simply stared at me, his hand rising to touch the spot where I'd hit him. Surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by something I never expected. He laughed, a genuine, deep sound I hadn't heard in all the weeks I'd been here. You're fiercer than I remembered, he said softly. Remembered? My hazel eyes sharpened. What does that mean, Alexei? He didn't answer. He turned and left, the silence he left behind heavier than the shout. That night, the nightmare came in full color. I saw a young Alexei, Alyosha, sitting at a piano in a cold room, his small fingers teaching mine how to hold a piece of charcoal. I'll find you, Tasha. I promise, he whispered. Then the men in black arrived. I saw his small body attacking them, screaming my name as they dragged me into the snow. I woke up gasping, my porcelain skin covered in a cold sweat. I sat up in the dark, the name tasting like ancient history on my tongue. My name wasn't always Chun. I whispered to the empty room. My memories hadn't been lost. They had been surgically removed or suppressed. And the man in the other room held the scalpel. I stood at the window, watching Alexei in the courtyard below. He was pacing like a caged wolf, his imposing frame silhouetted against the moonlight. I studied the line of his shoulders, the way he carried the weight of the world. With an artist's eye, I finally saw the boy beneath the monster. Alyosha. I whispered into the glass. Below, as if he could hear me, the Pakhan stopped. He looked up at my window, his ice-blue eyes troubled and searching, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might find in the dark. I found him in his office, a room that smelled of expensive tobacco and old secrets. Alexei sat behind a desk of dark oak, his imposing frame casting a shadow that felt like a physical weight. My hands were trembling, but my spirit was iron. I didn't wait for him to speak. Who was I before Moscow, Alexei? No more lies. No more locking me away for my own good. He didn't look up immediately. His ice-blue eyes were fixed on a glass of amber liquid, his knuckles white. When he finally looked at me, I saw the conflict warring behind his gaze, the desire to keep me in a porcelain cage versus the recognition of the woman standing before him. You are the girl I failed to save, he said, his voice a low, jagged rasp. He stood, pacing the length of the room like a tethered predator. There was a trafficking ring operating out of the orphanage where I grew up. I was 9. I tried to free the children before the men in black arrived. You were one of them. He stopped, his back to me. I lost track of you in the chaos. I searched for years, Natasha. When I saw you in that club, I thought I was seeing a ghost. My hazel eyes filled with the stinging salt of unshed tears. The fragments of the boy in the snow began to align. That's why you married me. Because I reminded you of a failure you couldn't forget. He turned then, his stare so intense it felt like a brand. You don't remind me of her. You are her. I know it in my marrow. But when I asked how he could be so certain, what proof he held, the ice returned to his expression. He wouldn't say more. I retreated to the studio, painting until my fingers bled. I didn't plan the image. It flowed out of me as if the charcoal were an extension of my nervous system. I created a portrait of a young boy with gray-blue eyes, kind, serious, and infinitely lonely. I didn't realize I was painting a 9-year-old Alexei until I heard a sharp intake of breath at the door. Alexei stood there, his face paler than I had ever seen it. He looked at the boy on the canvas, then back at me, his eyes filled with a recognition so painful it was visceral. He nearly broke, his dominant posture sagging for a fraction of a second, before he turned and vanished into the hallway without a word. While I was painting ghosts, Zara was battling the living. I found her later in the gym, her athletic frame damp with sweat from the heavy bag. Dmitri was there, watching her with a shuttered expression. I know I'm the reason your family lost everything, Zara said, her steel-gray eyes wider and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. But I care about you, Dmitri. Truly. Dmitri's crooked smile vanished. Don't, he snapped, his green eyes cold. This isn't real, Zara. You'll only get hurt. He tried to push past her, but she didn't let him. She grabbed his shirt and kissed him. A fierce, desperate collision that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with truth. He responded for a heartbeat, his rings cold against her neck, before he caught himself and fled. Zara followed him secretly to the compound's private chapel. From the shadows, she watched as the lean enforcer knelt before a flickering candle, his head bowed. Through the heavy silence, she heard him whispering in Russian, his voice thick with agony. Forgive me, Papa. I'm falling for the woman I swore to hate. But she's not the monster. She was his victim, too. She makes me want to be more than your revenge. Zara slipped away before he could see her, her jet-black hair a blur in the dark corridor. When we finally met in the garden that night, we were both raw, stripped of our armor. I sat in my nightgown, feeling small against the vast Russian sky, while Zara paced in her workout gear. I'm remembering things, Zara. Bad things, I whispered. I don't know who I am anymore. And I'm falling for a man who thinks he has to choose between me and his father's ghost, she replied, her voice cracking. We sat on the bench and pulled each other into a fierce embrace under the stars. The 1 month to escape was over. We weren't running anymore. We can't keep hiding from them, I said, my voice finally steady. Or from ourselves. Then we stay, Zara declared, her steel-gray eyes sharpening. We fight. We face this together. But as we made our pact, the red light of a hidden camera blinked in the shrubbery. Miles away, Viktor Volkov smiled as he dialed a number. Agent Morrison? The women are becoming a problem, Viktor said into the phone. It's time to separate them from their protection. The smell of gunpowder and ozone seemed to cling to the very air of the compound, a sharp reminder that the 1 month was no longer a countdown to freedom, but a countdown to war. Yuri Petrov's crew had struck one of the main Volkov warehouses, a direct challenge to Alexei's sovereignty. I watched from the hallway as Alexei prepared for the response, his imposing frame silhouetted against the light of the armory. He was strapping on weapons with a cold, mechanical precision, his ice-blue eyes flat and arctic. He was the Pakhan, a man of death and order. You want to know who I am, Natasha? How this world works? He asked, his voice a low vibration that seemed to rattle my bones. Don't stay in the studio today. Watch. He took me to the command center, a high-tech bunker that felt light years away from my charcoal sketches and silk blouses. I stood there in a soft pastel dress, an ethereal ghost among the flickering monitors and heavy weaponry. I watched him command. He barked orders in Russian, his pale, scarred face harsh under the fluorescent lights as he directed strikes and negotiated with sub-bosses. Men jumped at his words, their respect fueled by a fear that was almost palpable. I expected to feel repulsed. I expected to feel the same suffocating panic that usually gripped my chest. Instead, my hazel eyes were dilated with a strange, dark fascination. I saw the power, the absolute control, and the deadly precision it took to keep a city from burning. I shouldn't want this, I thought, my heart hammering against my ribs. I shouldn't want a man who breathes violence. But as our eyes met across the room, I realized the truth. I wasn't afraid of his darkness. I was afraid of how much I wanted to be the light at the center of it. Miles away, at the burning warehouse, Zara was proving she was more than a con artist. She had followed the strike team against orders, slipping through the shadows in tactical black. When Dmitri was pinned down by a hail of gunfire, his lean frame pressed against a shipping container, it wasn't an enforcer who saved him.
It was Zara.
She moved with a precision she didn't know she possessed, snatching a weapon from a fallen guard. Dimitri's green eyes went wide as she laid down cover fire. "You know how to shoot?" he roared over the din. "My ex made me learn," Zara shouted back, her steel-gray stare fixed on the treeline. "I didn't realize I'd use it to save a man instead of for his crimes." They fought side by side, a synchronized unit of sharp instincts and brutal efficiency. Her athletic curves and his lean frame moved as one, the chemistry between them forged in the fire of combat. When the smoke cleared, the adrenaline didn't fade, it transformed. That night, the marriages we had treated as drunken mistakes finally became real. Back at the compound, Alexei was still covered in the dust and blood of the day, his ice-blue eyes wild and hungry. I met him in his penthouse bedroom, my soft dress a stark contrast to his rugged violence. "I saw the real you today," I whispered, my delicate hands reaching out to cup his scarred face. "And I'm not afraid." "You should be," he growled, his voice rough with a decade of repressed longing. "I'm a monster, Tasha." "Then you're my monster," I replied. He took me with a passion that was both desperate and incredibly gentle. His broad shoulders shielded my slim body as he lowered me onto the black silk sheets, his chestnut brown hair falling forward as he whispered against my porcelain skin. "Tasha," he breathed, using the name from our childhood. I didn't correct him. For the first time, it felt like I was finally home. At the loft, Zara and Dmitri were consumed by the same fire. "I fought for you today," Zara said, her steel-gray stare fearless as she stripped off her tactical gear. "Everything changed the moment I stopped hating you," Dmitri answered, his crooked smile soft and genuine for the first time. He worshipped her olive skin, his rings catching the low light as he held her athletic curves against his lean frame. "I choose you, Zara, regardless of the past." The morning after was a quiet montage of intimacy. I sat in the golden light of the bedroom, tracing the extensive tattoos on Alexei's pale skin. My fingers stopped on a series of small, intricate marks. My hazel eyes filled with tears as I realized what they were. Each one represented a girl he had saved from trafficking, 15 years of searching, 15 years of rescuing others because he couldn't rescue me. "You've been saving me over and over, haven't you?" I whispered. He looked at me, his ice-blue eyes wet. "Every single one. Hoping the next time would be you." In the loft, Dmitri held Zara in the bath, her jet-black hair loose around them. They talked about his father and Victor's abuse, the truth finally washing away the blame. "We were both his victims," Zara murmured. "But we survived." But the survival was about to get more complicated. 2 weeks later, a persistent nausea forced me to the bathroom in the art studio. My delicate hands shook as I waited for the result of the test. 2 lines. Positive. My hazel eyes went wide, my hand instinctively dropping to my belly. "Oh God." Parallel to my shock, Zara stood in Dimitri's bathroom, staring at her own test with a disbelieving steel-gray gaze. Positive. Her sharp features showed a rare, raw vulnerability. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not now." But as we both looked at the evidence of new life blooming amidst the blood and vows, a flicker of hope ignited. We were no longer just survivors. We were protectors of a future we never thought we'd have. They say you can't start over, that your past defines you. But I woke up in Moscow and remembered, sometimes you don't start over. Sometimes you come home.
To the boy who tried to save you.
To the friend who never left you. To the family you choose. And sometimes, the crazy night you can't remember is the beginning of the life you'll never forget. What happens next? Like and subscribe to find out. Also click on the notification button to know when we have a new video.